And for those of you who don't know us, the ENA, we're the Energy Networks Association. We represent all of the gas and electricity networks in the UK and Ireland at both transmission and distribution level. Today is actually the first of 3 events that we're holding in the run up to and into COP26. The second one's actually next week on the 26th in the morning. That's going to be focused on supply chains of the future. And then our series culminates with our in-person COP26 event in Glasgow on the 8th of November. So that's going to be an in-person panel event held at Scottish Power's headquarters, one of our members, and we've got quite a great panel there, including the former Australian Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull, Audrey Zibelman, who's the CEO of Google X, their moonshot company, and it's also going to be chaired by Samira Ahmed from the BBC. So that's going to be a really exciting session. All of these events are free and everyone's welcome to join them. We'll put the links in the chat during the session, and we'll also follow up via email with the links. You basically just register online, similar to what you would have done for this event, but we'd love to see you either virtually next week or in person in Glasgow. So back to today's session. Just a quick bit of housekeeping. So you'll notice that we've put you on mute. We are looking for questions and interaction from the audience. So do use the chat function in Teams to ask questions to any of the speakers throughout. Once we've done the introductions and introductory remarks, we'll get to a Q&A panel. So please do put your questions in there. You probably have also noticed that we are going to be recording the session. And we're going to make it available on ENA's YouTube channel after the event. You'll get the links to that via email, or you can see them on social media. But in terms of our other speakers today, I'm delighted to be joined by Natasha from OZEV, Paul from NIE Networks, which is one of our members, and Stefanos from Piccolo. These guys are going to introduce themselves more formally in a bit more detail in a minute. But really looking forward to hearing from these guys and understanding what successes they've seen across different markets, the interest we're seeing from other countries, and how we can really export the great work that we're doing in the UK. So just as a bit of framing and a few introductory remarks from myself to set the scene, I wanted to sort of give you guys a bit of an overview and a few stats on where we're at. It's quite topical given some of the recent announcements. So basically, the UK is repeatedly held up as the G20 nation which has the most successfully decarbonised electricity system while still actually growing economically. This is in part due to a lot of decarbonisation in electricity. And to give you an idea of some of the stats, last year, around about 43% of our electricity was generated by renewables. And if you count low carbon generation, that goes up by about an extra 20% to around 63% with nuclear power as well. And indeed, one day in May, earlier this year, we had over 60%, I think it was 62.5%, of all electricity generated by wind alone, which is quite impressive. And renewable technology in particular is one of the cheapest forms of power that we have at the moment. And that's why these technologies are being held up as a good example of our world leadership in this space. Our offshore wind fleet alone used to be the world's largest until a few weeks ago when I think China unfortunately overtook us. But other parts of the energy sector are rapidly decarbonising as well, albeit a little bit further behind. So if you look at our gas networks, ENA's obviously represents gas as well as electricity. We've got a huge array of hydrogen demonstration projects that they're running across the whole country. And one of our aims is to develop the world's first green gas grid, which is what our Gas Goes Green project, is looking at. And then when it comes to transport, I don't want to steal too much of Natasha's thunder, but we are seeing a really rapid uptake in EVs as well. There's over 600,000 EVs on the road now, and we've obviously also got the phase out dates in place as well for ICE vehicles. So just a bit on specifically on exports. Obviously, the UK has a big focus on exports, services, skills, and products. And actually, the energy networks have been leading some of this work in particular as well, especially in the innovation space, the new energy market space, and also smart grid space. So a couple of examples. We've got local flexibility markets that the distribution networks are facilitating here. These are by far the largest in the world now that we've seen, and this is effectively driven by our flexibility first approach. This is where the distribution networks are looking to procure flexibility services from third parties to relieve network congestion ahead of network reinforcement where it's cost effective. So in terms of the size of these markets, they've gone from basically zero in 2018, at the start of 2018, to around about 3 gigawatts being tendered out across GB in 2021 at a postcode level. And as of, I think it was end of August, we'd already contracted over 50% of that. So the market growth in this area is absolutely rapid and well ahead of other nations. And a lot of that came off the back of innovation trials and innovation projects that we very much lead on with our regulatory framework that I'll talk about in a minute. And I think we'll also probably hear from Stefanos in a minute, who's also working in the flexibility market space, about what Piccolo have done both in the UK and also into Europe. So at ENA, we are helping facilitate that sort of activity. So I mentioned our Gas Goes Green project, which is looking at the world's first zero carbon gas grid. We've also got our Open Networks project, which is sort of like the sister project on the electricity side of the business. That's looking at rolling out the smart grid and helping facilitate those flexibility markets. And we also, alongside government and the regulator earlier this year, launched a green recovery scheme where we're effectively unlocking an additional £300 million in the distribution networks to help facilitate low carbon projects that are shovel ready to help support the green recovery from COVID. And all of this, one would argue, has been based off of the UK's strong climate focused policies and also the regulatory regime to back that up. The regulator in the UK, or GB, sorry, is Ofgem, and it's very much a performance-based, output-focused regulatory model, which also has a heavy focus on innovation. And this has been absolutely critical to transforming the electricity networks in particular. There's no way that we would be where we are now without that sort of regulatory regime. The regime, which is called RIIO, is, nothing's perfect, but it is seen as a world leader. And we've got countries, other networks, other governments coming to us and government and Ofgem all the time to look at how they can move towards this type of performance-based regime. So this, coupled with those policies that I mentioned, has really been key in mobilising the additional billions of pounds of private investment that we've had, which is obviously critical to achieving net zero. So just in summary, the combination of the private capital, the regulation, the innovation, the strong government policy, and also a diverse and innovative industry has created this sort of environment where our energy system is leading in the race to net zero globally, despite all the uncertainty we've had with COVID and also Brexit as well, I guess. And today we really want to explore what opportunities there are to export this to the world and not only create more jobs for ourselves, but also help the global community also drive towards net zero. So without further ado, I'm now going to throw to the panel. They're going to spend up to 5 minutes introducing themselves, their role, their company and some opening remarks on how they think the UK can position itself globally. So in no particular order, we'll go off the order on my screen. We will start with Paul from NIE.
Thank you, Randolph, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us, and thanks to the ENA for the opportunity to participate in this event. My name is Paul Stapleton. I'm Managing Director of NIE Networks, which stands for Northern Ireland Electricity Networks. It is what it says on the tin. We own and manage the electricity network here in Northern Ireland, both at transmission and distribution level. We serve almost 900,000 customers with a network of about 50,000 kilometres. The context for us in Northern Ireland is somewhat different to the rest of the UK in that we are a small peripheral market in comparison to GB. But we're also part of an all-island wholesale electricity market, which covers the island of Ireland. So we look south as well as looking east in terms of our sphere of influence. We have our own regulator here in Northern Ireland, utility regulator, also subject to policy, which is determined locally here by the devolved administration. However, the regulatory and industry models adopted here for Northern Ireland are largely in line with GB, and we very much look to GB Ofgem for precedent. Being small and peripheral has disadvantages, but it also has certain advantages in terms of agility and potentially being a testbed for solutions to be developed here that can be deployed in other markets. Northern Ireland has achieved almost 50% of electricity from renewable sources, which in our case is mainly onshore wind. We're also achieving up to 75%, what in the industry jargon is SNSP, but essentially means 75% of electricity coming from wind at any particular instant. And that's been world leading for a small isolated system like ours. Many of the technologies used to enable that have been pioneered here in Northern Ireland and are now being deployed in other markets across the world. So I think it's a real example of exporting net zero, the team we're talking to today. We have global players like GE who are present here in Northern Ireland, who have developed smart renewable dispatch and stability tools at transmission level, and also a product called Nodal Controller at distribution level for enabling more wind to connect to the system and more efficient and effective dispatch of wind. Also, Hitachi, another global player, have been developing solutions for transmission networks to cope with more wind, addressing the challenges of providing inertia and short circuit current to ensure system voltage and frequency stability. They're involved in projects which have also been funded by Ofgem's Network Innovation Competition in conjunction with National Grid and Scottish Power. So examples of OEMs, global technology providers working locally here in the UK, using some of the groundbreaking, I suppose, innovation techniques and models supported by Ofgem, develop solutions which are now being used and deployed in other markets across the world. We also have maybe a third example I'd mention here in Northern Ireland. We have a local company called Camlin, an indigenous Northern Ireland company, who are providing world-leading smart technology for distribution networks. They've worked with ourselves in NIE, but also working with the other DNOs, many of the other DNOs across the UK, providing solutions at LV level, low voltage level primarily, solutions to support online transformer monitoring, active network management, enhancing LV visibility, greater connection of low carbon technologies, etc. And that's all from a local base here in Lisburn in Northern Ireland. So there's real examples of both global players and local players using Northern Ireland and using the UK as to pioneer technology solutions in the broader smart grid area, but really under the theme of enabling a more renewable energy system, and now extending those products to other markets across the world. In policy terms, I guess Northern Ireland is coming from behind to some degree. We don't yet have the overarching policy framework in terms of a clear net zero target and an energy policy focus on net zero that you have at UK level. But we are anticipating that those pieces are coming together, and we are anticipating very significant progress on that in the coming weeks. And that will help to kickstart further investment and opportunities for the supply chain. Northern Ireland, and I guess Belfast here specifically, has been rated one of the smartest, most digital cities in the UK with a very strong ICT sector, and I see that as a key enabler of the smart grid and the renewable energy system of the future, and great opportunities for technology solutions to be developed here locally. Because we are a small peripheral region, I think the Northern Ireland electricity grid makes an ideal testbed to trial some of these new technologies. Also, there is only one electricity company, one system operator, one regulator, one local department for the economy, which oversees energy policy. So there's a degree of agility in having all the key stakeholders and influencers together in one small place with easy access to each other. We've also developed very good relationships with the local universities, and also across sectors with the water sector, the transport sector, the housing executive, for example, and the gas companies, working collaboratively to develop local solutions. These are solutions that can be developed here and extended to other markets across the world. So many examples here in a peripheral region in the UK context, I think, already exporting net zero and driving progress here locally. So look forward to a very lively and interesting debate here today. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Paul. And really good to see you guys getting some flexibility markets up and running recently as well. We're going to be including those in our stats going forward, which is brilliant.
Sure. Our first ever tender for flexibility services recently completed and very successful.
Indeed.
All progress.
Yeah, indeed. Great. Okay. All right. Thanks, Paul. Let's go now to Natasha from OZEB.
Thanks a lot. So for those of you who don't know me, which is probably most of you, I'm Natasha Robinson. I'm joint head of the Office for Zero Emission Vehicles, which is part of the UK government and reports into both the Business Department, BEIS, and the Department for Transport. I am a bit biased, but I think some of the most exciting stuff that's happening is in that sort of intersection between energy and transport, and a whole new whole new sectors opening up. So I think there's some really amazing opportunities which the UK is really well placed to look at. So just a bit of background in terms of where the market is at the moment and where government policy is. So I'm sure a lot of you would have picked up around just under a year ago, Boris Johnson stood up and made a commitment that there'd be no new petrol and diesel cars and vans from 2030, and that from 2035 there would be 100% zero emission for all new cars. And over the last year, we've really been seeing the market starting to starting that inflection and starting on the up on what looks like it could be an S-curve. So just for example, sales of plug-in vehicles in 2019 was about 1 in 30 vehicles. In 2020 so far, it's 1 in 6 vehicles. And in September alone, there was 32,000 full battery electric vehicles sold, and that was almost the same as the whole of 2019. So, you know, we've seen a real shift just in the last couple of years, but it is still quite a low overall percentage of the market in terms of the whole fleet, because it takes some time for the fleet turnover, but really quite exciting times on that front. So we've got quite a lot going on in terms of electric vehicles in the UK, both looking at the vehicles themselves, but also critically, particularly from the energy point of view, the infrastructure side. So there was an announcement, a further announcement yesterday, as Randolph said, around the net zero strategy. On the zero emission vehicle side, we got a commitment to more new funding, particularly for the infrastructure element. So we've now got, I think, a total of £2.5 billion over the next 5 years, including this one, to spend on helping to incentivise this market and really make sure that we're powering ahead on it. We've now got already 25,000 charge points in the UK, but we're going to need a lot more in order to meet those sort of 2030 and 2035. So there's a need for a lot of electricians out there and a lot of others. One of the other reasons I was quite excited to be doing this panel today, and I think I said to Randolph just before we started, with COP26, most of the time I spend worrying about domestic policy and how we're going to do this in the UK. It is one of the most critical bits if we're going to do net zero. Thanks to all the decarbonisation on the energy system, transport is now the biggest emitter. If we don't do something about transport, then we won't meet net zero by 2050. So most of the time I spend on domestic policy. Over the last few weeks, partly in the run up to COP26, we've been doing a lot of discussions internationally and working quite closely with colleagues on that. And, you know, there are some places and people who are also in the leading pack. I mean, we always point to Norway. They're doing an amazing job. I'd point to Netherlands, California, some of those. But the UK is up there in terms of the sorts of things that we're doing. And as I said, particularly on some of that stuff around the interface between the two. Back before we had at an in-person event I was at before all this lovely COVID, I remember being chased around an international event by someone from South Africa who was really excited about some of the stuff that we've been doing on vehicle to grid and smart, and how we're working within what is a very constrained energy system to make sure that we were making the most of it. So there is definitely a lot of sort of market out there for where we want to be. And I think some of the things that we've been looking at and considering are exactly the same challenges and opportunities that other places around the world are looking at. So again, this week, been talking to Poland, who are really enthusiastic about it. They've got a much smaller market than we have in the UK, but they've also got some real enthusiasm for going on this journey. So how can we help other places do that? New Zealand also, I wasn't aware till this week exactly how much they've been ramping up their market and bringing in new incentives and things. So some really exciting things happening all over the world, and very much UK as part of that, and particularly helping to lead the way in terms of that interface between transport and energy.
Brilliant, thanks Natasha. Really interesting. I always love hearing the latest facts and figures from you. Not just because I love facts and figures, but you know, it's for us energy nerds, that's the sort of thing that sort of gets you out of bed in the morning, hearing that sort of progress, which is fantastic. Right, last but not least, we are going to hear from Stefanos from Piccolo. Over to you, Stefanos.
Hi, Randolph. Thank you very much for the invite today. I'm really excited, and thanks for the ENA for organizing this series. I'd like to thank also Paul and Natasha for the introductions. As you said, fellow energy geeks, those kind of figures are what makes us go out of bed every morning and meeting our net zero targets. My name is Stefanos. I am the commercial manager at Piclo. Piclo is a software company based in London. We are the independent marketplace for DSO flexibility. In 2019, we started with an innovation program from BASE in order to help DNOs transition to system operators, being more active users of the energy networks, meeting the net zero. And we've started with a nationwide trial, and we helped DNOs procure 39 megawatts across that region then. But as Randolph said, the market has incredibly increased since then. So until today, into Piccolo Flex, 350 megawatts have been awarded to a number of technologies across the span. We are a technology agnostic platform. However, the positive news is that a lot of them are EV charger stations, vehicle to grid, domestic batteries. There is a variety of low carbon technologies. Apart from that figure, currently we are working with 4 distribution network operators in the UK Power Networks, Scots Power Energy Networks, Electricity North West, and Northern Ireland Electricity. We facilitated around 1,954 competitions so far. They are very regional, trying to fight constraints in the areas, but with the incentive of ENA and other work streams that they have done through open networks, we've managed to successfully reach this number, and they've awarded through Piclo £55 million in contracts and flexibility. What else about Piclo? It's as I said, it's an independent marketplace. It's between a number of technologies. We are technology agnostic, as the distribution network operators are, between aggregators, project developers, startups that they have good ideas about helping the transport sector reach a net zero target, and they want to deploy technologies. Facilities managers, anyone really that has a name to reach the net zero and have a flexibility asset can participate in DSO Flex. Interesting fact about flexibility and the value is that the national grid in the report, let me see the name, I don't remember by heart, sorry, Community Renewables in 2019, they mentioned that the current usage of electricity in the UK is around 60 gigawatts, and with the decarbonization of the system, it might reach, and the continuous demand of energy usage, it might easily reach over 100 gigawatts, which I'm happy to say that flexibility in the studies that we've done across ourselves with our white papers that can be found online on Piclo, and also the studies ENA has done with the rest of the DNOs, has shown that flexibility can play a vital role in filling that gap that's needed. Coal factories are closing down, meeting our net zero. A lot of the outdated technologies that we used and relied so far to electrify our houses and anything are being decommissioned. So now we are moving to a more flexible and smart era of electricity.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Stefanos. And I think we'll explore where you guys have gone in Europe in a little while. Okay, so that sort of brings us to the end of the introductions and opening remarks. So we've now got around about half an hour for a Q&A session with the panel. So just as a reminder to everyone in the audience, feel free to ask questions. You can use the chat function to just put them in there. That's basically where Dan has put the link to our event. So feel free to pop your questions in there, and we'll direct them to the panel. But in the meantime, I've got a sort of couple of warm-up questions for the panel that I think I'd like to explore. So as Natasha and I both mentioned, the net zero strategy came out yesterday. The heat and building strategy came out as well. We also had a lot of other strategies come out in the last probably 18 months, which have been really important, or we think they've been really important. From an export perspective, and in terms of selling products, services, etc. overseas, how important is it that the UK has this policy? Do other countries even care about it? What value is it in that perspective? Maybe we'll start with Stefanos from a company who's trying to sell these services overseas. What do you think the value of these policies are?
I wanted to mention it also to my introductory, but I wanted to have the discussion to keep going. UK, as you said earlier in the intro, is leading the market in that field, and also sometimes I say that the clean energy package they directed from the European Commission, that it's out there, and specifically two articles, the 34 and 45 that are talking about this flexibility, are very much similar to what the UK has done so far through the open networks and other incentives of Ofgem and BASE. I think a lot of the countries and a lot of the DNOs that we are talking across mainland Europe, through either innovation project that we are participating in OneNet, or business as usual routes that we have, they are very much coming and asking us, how does the UK does it? How can we take the know-how of the UK and make it happen in our countries? We have an obligation to the European Commission, to our clients, to the citizens, to minimize the carbon emission of the grid. So we want to follow the path of the UK. It has been many times that we've asked Randolph or other networks to come in events that we host publicly to speak about the progress. We've been invited also many times because people want to know how the UK is leading that and how important it is. So even with Brexit in place, I think fellow European countries haven't been stopped from asking for advice in achieving the carbon targets that they have by following us as a global leader to the market, not only in Europe but other countries. We had discussions in Australia, we had discussion in the US, South and North America. So it is quite exciting to be here and leading the path towards that. Another interesting fact before I pass it to a fellow speaker is that I know that the UK has also overpassed Germany in a lot of these aspects. That many years ago, everybody would look at Germany, how they're leading the way with renewable energy or smart grid and stuff. So yeah, it's all very exciting.
Great, thanks, Stefanos. Natasha, did you want to jump in on the role of policy from the other countries' perspective?
I think it's really critical in terms of sort of setting that framework for people, and definitely from a sort of the more that we lead the way on it, I think other people also come along. I mean, we were the first G7 country to commit to phasing out internal combustion engines, but then we've seen other countries come the same way. Now there was other countries who went before us as well, but just setting out that framework, you end up with essentially a sort of beneficial domino effect of everybody going, oh, if they've done it, I can do it too. But then also that sort of collaboration at both the policy level and the industrial level and everything in terms of how do we get there and what do we need to do in order to do it. So I think it really helps to set that sort of that overall objective and to just set the agenda on it, which is really helpful. I mean, one of the things that we announced yesterday that we were looking to do in the UK context was for the future of vehicle regulation, we look to put in place a zero emission vehicle mandate. That's something that California's done and others, but one of the reasons why we want to do that is to set for the infrastructure market a really clear aim in terms of where it needs to get to, and that again helps delivery and helps to get to where we all need to be.
Great, thanks Natasha. Paul, anything from your side as well?
Sure. Well, as well as being members of the ENA, we're also members of EDSO, which is the European Association for Distribution System Operators, and what we see there is a very active and very similar debate on the same issues that we're challenged by here in the UK. I think the overall European policy has moved ahead. I won't say it moved ahead of the UK, but certainly moved along in line with the UK and following the same trends. And there's really, in substance, very little difference now between the policy frameworks emerging at European level and individual European countries and what we're aiming to do in the UK. I think we're ahead in certain areas here. You mentioned at the top, Randolph, the flexibility services and world-leading positions that we've achieved there. Most of the European countries aren't quite there yet in that area. But I think it's not so much about the UK setting the pace and policy anymore. I think we're all certainly all Western and developed countries is going to get there on the policy. I think it's more about the solutions and the integration of solutions. We're ahead in terms of integrating the different technologies in a kind of a whole of system way and developing our thinking in that space. And I think there'll be great opportunities for the UK to apply some of those integration solutions into other markets across Europe.
Excellent, thanks, Paul. We've had a question come in from Peter, and I know some of you touched on this already, but the question is, other than the UK, which other countries are most active and interested in innovation and smart grid technology? So Paul, maybe do you want to just pick up there from where you left off with EDSO and the sort of activity you're seeing there?
Well, certainly, I think all across Europe that there's interest. I would say the Nordic countries are probably certainly ahead at the customer-facing end. Natasha referenced in terms of electric vehicles, also technologies like heat pumps. I think the Netherlands has done a lot in areas like smart grid, working with a very different system than we have in GB, and certainly here in Ireland. The nature of the grid there in the Netherlands is quite different, but they would be quite advanced in some of the smart grid technologies. So obviously you could look at the Mediterranean countries have made huge progress in integrating solar, but I mean that's they're coming from a natural advantage in relation to integrating some of those technologies. So I think each area is playing to its own strengths, and we have unique strengths in the UK around in terms of the wind resources and some of the other solutions being on the west of the continent and access to sea and offshore wind in particular. So I suppose different regions are progressing. Interesting, we're seeing a lot of activity now and growing interest from Eastern Europe, countries that are maybe coming from behind somewhat in terms of I suppose their philosophy or attitude to climate change and embracing net zero and driving ahead on smart solutions, areas like Lithuania, Poland, and so on. So lots of good things happening right across the continent, I think.
Great. Yeah, I'd agree with that, Paul. That's certainly what we've seen from an ENA perspective with our European trade associations as well. Natasha, what about from an EV perspective? I know you mentioned Norway and South Africa. Any other areas that you've seen?
Yeah, so I'd agree with Paul on the Netherlands is doing some really amazing stuff in this space. I saw some stuff just yesterday that they're doing around sort of integrating their equivalent of motorway service areas into sort of solar, local solar distribution and using some of that, which is really exciting. Some similar challenges to what we're facing in the UK. I think I might have referenced it before, but I think obviously some of America, they have a very different energy system to us, but equally some similar challenges coming through whenever I've spoken to them around some of the things that they're worried about in terms of that. And some of the sort of emerging areas, I mentioned them before, but New Zealand, again, they're a long way away, but they have some quite similar challenges to us. And Costa Rica as well have just recently joined some of our international work. So some of that sort of South America. We've done quite a lot of work with Mexico in the past. Obviously very interested in electric vehicles from the manufacturing perspective. They're a big auto manufacturing area, but also in terms of sort of how do they manage that transition and how do they get there? So I'd also point potentially to the whole of the Americas, not just North America, who are thinking about that sort of thing.
Oh, very interesting. That's a really global footprint. That's great.
It's really great.
Yeah.
And China, sorry, I should definitely mention China because they are doing a lot in terms of this, but tends to be slightly less maybe transparent than some other areas.
Yeah, and I was also reading the other day that 124 countries now have a net zero 2050 target as well, which is really fantastic news and obviously helps drive a lot of this. Stefanos, from a Piccolo perspective, what countries are you guys focusing on who have an interest in this area?
It's very interesting because apart from the countries that Paul and Natasha mentioned, that they are actively looking at flexibility as well as a solution. The grids are a bit more resilient because of the weather conditions that they had in the past. They are a bit more resilient. However, they are very much looking and investigating how they can bring solution more dynamically in the low voltage networks because they see a lot of electric vehicles being integrated to the system. There are two types of approaches we've seen so far in Europe. The one with this through innovation programs, specifically one called OneNet, where the entirety of Europe, all the DNOs of Europe and TSOs have come together on this massive project for DNO TSO coordination and local flexibility. Some of the countries there are Finland, Lithuania, Estonia, Slovenia. Especially with Slovenia, we have also a memorandum of understanding, and we are working very closely together in developing a market for them. They really want to get the hands dirty, let's say, in enabling the market, enabling EV solutions, enabling aggregation, and other kind of things. And then we have the Mediterranean countries, where the past years, the truth is they've been hit really hard by the economical crisis, and now the corona crisis also hit them really hard, and they're taking a step slower than the rest of the Europe. However, they are very much in position to take advantage of all these renewables, and they're thinking, okay, now all these renewables is coming. How are we going to manage all this flexibility in our grids? Is our grids good enough? Is flexibility a solution moving forward? So we've seen countries like Spain and Portugal and Italy and Greece exploring solutions, not so BAU approach, but definitely they are trying to keep up with the northern part of Europe.
Makes sense. I mean, that's how we started in the UK, right? We started with a pilot and innovation type approach, so it would make sense for them to do the same.
Exactly. And another country I forgot to mention through ISGAN that we are part of, a national UK team. We're helping other countries as well adopt. It's Canada, who is leading a work group with the UK around flexibility. Canada has a very particular energy system. They have a lot of hydro and a lot of renewables and a lot of outdated, let's say, power sources, and they're trying to explore how they can balance this transition and adopt flexibility. A very interesting landscape in general.
Yeah, I mean, Canada, I think, and the UK government set up that Power Forward challenge as well. Exactly. Which was quite interesting. So it showed that they're really, really interested in this space too. Rightio. We've got another question come in into the chat from Catherine. So the UK and Ireland have particular challenges given that they are islands, albeit with interconnectors. Are there particular countries with similar challenges that the UK should be targeting given our solutions and technologies? So Paul, maybe did you want to take that one first?
Yeah, I mean, being islands does bring certain challenges. I think it also brings certain advantages, as I mentioned, particularly the offshore potential, and I'm sure wind, wave, and tidal in due course. I think will emerge over time. So we will have access to technologies and sources of renewable energy that maybe countries in the middle of the continent of Europe won't necessarily have access to. So we can certainly develop solutions in those areas and bring to other markets that have similar geographies. In terms of specific ones, I guess New Zealand is often quoted as one with similar opportunities and similar challenges to ourselves. Australia is probably too big to be considered an island, Randolph, but you might I might insult you if I mention Australia in that context. I guess you could look at geographies around the world, but I think you don't necessarily need to be an island to have some of the challenges. Any country that's peripheral on the continent, so areas like Portugal, for example, parts of Spain, any areas that are somewhat regional and peripheral, maybe don't have the same backbone of a very strong transmission system supporting them, will have similar challenges as we have, certainly in an Irish context, and maybe to a lesser extent in GB. So there's lots of opportunities, I think, to learn from some of those markets, but also to export solutions to those markets.
Yeah, it's a good point, Paul. I mean, in terms of Australia, yeah, it's a big island, obviously, but it's funny because some of the grids within Australia are islanded. It's not all one big grid, so there are some similarities there from an electrical perspective that I think we can share our experience with, and vice versa. Stefanos and Natasha, anything that you wanted to add on the sort of the challenge of islands?
I would just add on. I think even if you go even smaller than the UK, islands, I mean, if you look at sort of Shetland Islands and that sort of thing, they can do some really exciting things because they do have a sort of constrained space, constrained market. So there are lots of opportunities there, you know, both there and sort of worldwide. You know, when you're looking at things like the Canary Islands and stuff like that as well. But yeah, lots of opportunities to really sort of do that sort of system level thinking on a micro scale when you're looking at, not that micro, but you know, when you're looking at a whole island economy, you can look at all of that. You're not having to go long distances or anything. So yeah, I think there is a lot of really exciting stuff happening on islands all over the place. And I think Paul mentioned most of the main ones that I can think of, but yeah, I think we're looking there, and some of the ones around sort of Central America and things as well can be quite interesting on that front.
I'll have to add there, like, we don't have to go really far, like 4 hours with a plane in Greece, 277 islands, none of them recently connected to the mainland and the main power factories. And the DNO in Greece and the TSO are doing an incredible job, an incredible project connecting all the islands together. It's a very challenging project, but it's very needed because all these islands get roughly 30 million visitors a year, and they have a lot of energy problems. And it's funny because people think Greece are holidays and nice weather, but we do have this kind of challenges there, and these kind of solutions are bringing cheaper and better electricity to these remote places. Interconnection with Italy as well, that has definitely helped, and it's the first step before, in my humble opinion, DNOs in this region look into flexibility.
It's a really good point, and I agree with what Natasha said. ENA has affiliate members, and some of them are like Jersey Electric, Guernsey Electric, Isle of Man Electric, Manx Electric, I think it is. And they've come to us because they've sort of seen the innovation and saying, send some of these innovators and smart grid companies our way. We've got a test bed, we've got an island, and you know, we want to make it smart. We've obviously got all the same challenges with EVs and stuff. Come and trial and test things. So I think it's a really good point that there is an opportunity there with Ireland. We've got about 10 minutes left. We've got another question come in from Josh. What barriers are there to emerging markets like flexibility or to the growth of EVs? So I think this question is basically saying, for these other countries, what challenges do they have that we don't have, that we've managed to get past, that they will also need to get over to start rolling out these types of technologies? Natasha, did you want to maybe start with that one from an EV perspective?
Yeah, I think a lot of the things on the EV side, there's some basic ones that apply worldwide. There's ramping up the supply chains, making sure that you've actually got the vehicles available. That is happening, and it's happening at pace. You know, I'm sure that there'll be some times when the demand outstrips the supply and vice versa, as is the way with how markets develop. But you know, it is happening and it is rolling out. And there aren't, you know, they're increasing the mining of the materials and all of that type of thing. So there's some barriers along those routes. But I think a lot of it is around is actually around the sort of consumer acceptance and consumer understanding. And that is just a huge bit of work that we've thought about a lot in the UK context, other people have as well. And I think this applies to smart systems as well. So where we've been looking at bringing in the new regulations, which would apply, which would ensure that all charge points are smart when they're sold. You know, it's how do we communicate that to people? How do we encourage them to actually use that functionality? How does that fit in with things like energy costs and that type of thing? So I think there is both whether they'll accept in my case, the electric vehicles, but then also whether there are ways that we can encourage people to then use them in a way that, you know, sort of minimises the impact on the energy system and maximises the costs and minimises the cost for the individuals. So I think that's where it starts to get really exciting. You know, you've got stuff like, as it stands at the moment, an EV is a third, with the current grid mix, an EV is takes a third less sort of energy to move it forward in terms of whole life cost than an internal combustion engine. And we're expecting that to decrease significantly over time. So there is value in that for the consumer, but how do you realise that, and how do you make it make that sort of transition for people? But yeah, it's exciting stuff, but there are there are quite a lot of hurdles there, particularly around sort of perception and understanding from people.
Yeah, really good point. Couldn't agree more. Paul?
Yeah, I would tend to agree. I think the barriers will be, there'll be barriers around policy and regulatory models, and which, the models we have here in the UK are well developed and quite mature, even in some of the new areas. But other than that, I think it'll be mainly around people, because the technologies will tend to be transferable, and the providers of the technologies will be happy to transfer and deploy technologies in different markets. But those markets might struggle if they don't have the local know-how and the expertise in integrating those various technologies and in engaging with customers. And I think customer engagement will be a bit of a barrier for it's still an issue for ourselves in the UK and will be a barrier for new markets. But there's opportunities there for the UK and Ireland, not just to sell technology solutions, but also to sell know-how. If I look at our own sister company, for example, ESB in Ireland has an international consultancy division, has had for about 40 years, selling know-how essentially in the energy space across the Middle East and Africa, and is now leveraging the solutions that ESB are developing in both networks and generation around net zero to leverage that know-how to sell solutions to those jurisdictions. So there's lots of opportunities, I think, for the UK to sell not just technology solutions, but also intellectual capital and bring them to those markets as well.
Yeah, really good point, Paul. Stefanos, what about from your side?
I think there are two things. The one is the policy that my fellow speakers covered. I think the UK has a very agile way of making policy and allowing people being very creative within innovation. And the second thing is part of the whole flexibility, decarbonization and transport sector has to do with the individual earnings of people and the affordability of electric cars. We certainly need to help these companies ramp up production to reduce the cost, but also we need to consider that other parts of Europe are not as wealthy as certain parts in the UK that they can afford an electric vehicle. And I think that might be a barrier for lawmakers and other regions to consider, because they have fuel poverty, energy poverty. They have other things as well that they need to consider. I know it's a bit grim, but a grim perspective of things, but it's a very realistic one that when we are deploying a new law or a new legislation to improve and reach our carbon net zero, we need to consider also these aspects. And certainly the UK has. It's not always perfect, but at least it's there. And other countries need to follow this example. So companies like Piccolo or other innovative companies that they want to help decarbonization can go there and not be alienated, because we've been to conferences, we've been to countries, and the first question is like, what you guys are talking about? Like we don't have the financial situation to procure an electric vehicle. How are we going to do flexibility?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Okay, I'm going to squeeze one more question in. So technically this is a trade webinar, but as you guys know, I like mixing it up. So I want to ask about inward investment or investment from these other countries into the UK. So particularly in light of Brexit and obviously with COP coming up, what more can the government do to support international investment in our energy industry? Maybe start with Natasha on this.
Oh, that's a bit unfair, Randolph.
Thought I'd mix it up. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think there is quite a lot already happening in terms of sort of looking at supporting investment and as has been mentioned before, sort of looking at the regulatory regime. And I think that is one of the key bits, is how do you set that regulatory framework and make that sort of welcoming things. I think there is quite a lot. I'll talk mostly about the EV side. There is quite a lot of inward investment, particularly in the charge point market and things like that. We've seen sort of companies come in invest in either UK charge point companies or come in and do that. So I think we are seeing quite a good sort of passage of things both in and out. And then also on the auto side, we've had some big investments such as Nissan and Envision up in Sunderland, and Stellantis making a big commitment in Ellesmere Port. So there have been some big ones. I would say some of my colleagues work on this, but long, complex process, sort of landing some of that when you're talking about these really big deals. But yeah, so I think there is a lot going on and a lot of sort of political will behind it. But yeah, it's a exciting area, but a lot of challenges there as well.
Great. Stefanos, how are you guys bringing in international investment?
It's a very interesting question, Randolph, and I'll be very, very, very honest. I was very sad with Brexit as a European citizen living in the UK, but I have to admit that the Department of International Trade has done an excellent job in supporting British businesses trying to go abroad. I think the biggest barrier that in the politics level the fellow European countries need to address is the bureaucracy. Going to a country to establish a business, a startup business, or a well-oiled machine, there are a lot of bureaucratic barriers that don't allow businesses like us to go there and hit the floor running. And we have to delay, and we have to invest money in things that we shouldn't be, because essentially we want to promote the green transformation of the grid. We want to promote new businesses, as Natasha said, loads of electricians, loads of work. So I think the UK government so far, at least as Piccolo, they've been very supportive through the Department of International Trade. But the barrier is the EU countries. Even if they are in the EU, they don't have standardized processes for market penetration.
Great, thanks, Stefanos. And Paul, over to you.
Well, if I can answer, Randolph, in a Northern Ireland context rather than a UK context, because I think on this issue, Northern Ireland is quite different. Firstly, Brexit leaves us in quite a different position, actually a unique position in terms of access to both the UK and the EU markets, and that's a very attractive feature in terms of attracting foreign direct investment. There's been over £3 billion invested in the energy system in Northern Ireland over the last decade, and that's quite a lot for a region our size. And almost all of that came from outside of Northern Ireland, and most of it came from outside of the UK. So we have a very good track record in attracting foreign direct investment into the energy sector here. I think the key issue that needs to be addressed right now is that overarching policy framework. So that we need the devolved administration here to adopt an overall climate change bill, an energy or a climate action plan, green growth strategy, and an energy strategy that puts those stakes in the ground in terms of where we're going, aligns with the overall UK policy. And one other issue I would mention is around skills. I think as a sector, we're going to see an increasing shortage and difficulty in getting the right resources at all levels to enable all these solutions and grow our sector. So I would say the key barriers our local government needs to address is around that overarching energy policy, energy and climate action policy, and the skills issues.
Oh, that's a really good point, Paul. And we could probably talk for another hour about skills and resourcing quite easily. But unfortunately, we have come to the end of our time today. I want to give a big thanks to the speakers for spending time and answering our questions today. Really interesting, and I'm sure they'd be happy for the audience to reach out to them if there's any follow-up questions. Thanks to the audience as well for joining. I know it's a busy period at the moment, but I hope you really enjoyed it. Just a final reminder as well, as we put earlier in the chat, and we'll follow up via email, we've got our supply chains webinar next week on Tuesday, and then on the 8th of November, our in-person event, which will also be streamed in Glasgow at COP26 at Scottish Power's headquarters. So do check them out and sign up for them, and hope to see you there. Thanks again, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks. Thanks all. Bye.